I never believed in curses. I always thought they were just stories to scare kids or something you'd hear in horror movies. But what happened to me? It changed everything. Let me take you back to the summer of 2012, a time I can't forget no matter how much I try. My name is David Anderson, and this is a story I wish I'd never been a part of. I was 24 at the time, fresh out of college and ready to take on the world. I just moved into my first apartment, an old place in a small town in the middle of nowhere. The rent was cheap, and it was close to work. Perfect, right? Or so I thought. The apartment had this strange, unsettling vibe from the very first day I moved in. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things. The creak of the floorboards late at night, the draft that seemed to come from nowhere. I brushed it off, told myself I was just being paranoid. It was an old building, after all. What could go wrong? One evening, I was cleaning out the attic. I'd heard there was some old stuff left behind by the previous tenants, and I was curious. You know that feeling when you're about to discover something that maybe should have stayed hidden? Well, that's exactly what happened. Underneath a pile of dusty boxes, I found this small leather-bound diary. It looked ancient, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a museum, not an old attic. The cover was worn, and the pages were yellowed with age. I should have left it there. I should have turned around, gone back downstairs, and never looked at it again. But of course, I didn't. That night after dinner, I sat down with the diary, thinking I'd read a few pages, maybe uncover some cool historical notes or forgotten love letters. Instead, I uncovered something that still haunts me to this day. The first entry was dated July 3rd, 1924. The handwriting was neat, but shaky, like someone was nervous or afraid. It didn't take long before I realized why. The entries were disturbing. They talked about voices, shadows that moved on their own, objects disappearing, only to reappear in the strangest places. The writer, whose name was Grace, was clearly terrified. She described hearing footsteps in the attic every night at exactly 3 a.m., even though she lived alone. At first, I thought it was just the ramblings of someone with a vivid imagination, but as I kept reading, the tone of the diary changed. The entries became darker, more frantic. Grace started talking about seeing figures in her mirrors, reflections that weren't her own. I'm not going to lie to you. I felt a chill run down my spine. But I was hooked. I had to know how her story ended. The last few entries were almost unreadable, the handwriting erratic, like she was writing in a hurry or panic. She mentioned a visitor, someone who came to her door one rainy night, a tall figure dressed in black, whose face she couldn't quite make out. After that entry, the diary stopped. No explanation, no conclusion, just nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Who was this figure? What happened to Grace? And why did the diary end so suddenly? The next few nights were a blur. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises in the apartment, footsteps, whispers, things moving around in the attic. I convinced myself it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew. Something had changed since I found that diary. I tried to ignore it, but one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone walking around upstairs, the same time Grace had written about. I froze in bed, my heart racing. I told myself it was just the creaky old building. But then I heard it, the sound of something being dragged across the floor. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I made my way up to the attic, my hand shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I pushed it open, and there it was, the diary, lying open on the floor, even though I'd left it on the desk downstairs. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the attic, standing perfectly still, was a figure. Tall, dressed in black, just like Grace had described. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I don't remember running out of the attic. I don't remember grabbing my keys or getting in my car. All I remember is driving, as fast as I could, until I reached my friend's place miles away. I never went back to that apartment. I never opened that cursed diary again. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the footsteps. And I wonder, what did I awaken by opening it? Now, before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever experienced something strange, something you can't explain? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you brave enough, would you have opened that diary, or would you have left it where it was? Let's see how many of you would have done the same thing I did. Or if you're smarter than me, I stayed at my friend Michael's place that night. He could tell something was off the moment I showed up at his door, pale, trembling, and completely shaken. I didn't tell him the whole story at first. I just said there was something weird going on at the apartment, and I needed a place to crash. Michael, being Michael, didn't ask many questions. He just handed me a beer, threw me a blanket, and told me to get some rest. But sleep wasn't coming that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure from the attic, standing there, motionless, faceless, just watching. I could hear the dragging sound, the creak of the floorboards, the footsteps. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because when I woke up, it was morning, and for a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream. But then I remembered the diary, the figure, and the fact that I left everything behind in my rush to get out. Michael noticed me staring into space and finally asked, "David, what the hell happened?" I took a deep breath and told him everything, from the moment I found the diary to the figure in the attic. I could tell he was skeptical. I mean, who wouldn't be? Cursed diaries, shadowy figures. It sounded insane even to me, and I lived through it. "Maybe you were just tired," he said, trying to be reasonable. "You've been stressed with the new job and the move. Could be your mind playing tricks on you." I wanted to believe him. God, I really did. But I knew what I saw, and it wasn't my mind playing tricks. "Why don't we just go back to your apartment, grab your stuff, and if it's still weird, you can crash here for a while?" he suggested. I hesitated. The thought of going back to that place sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't avoid it forever. So later that day, we drove back to my apartment. When we arrived, everything looked normal. No strange sounds, no weird vibes. It was almost as if the place was mocking me. I grabbed a few bags and was about to leave when Michael asked, "Where's this diary you were talking about?" I froze. I hadn't mentioned the diary to him yet. How did he know? "You said something about a diary earlier," he added, noticing my reaction. I brushed it off, convincing myself I must have mentioned it during my late-night ramblings. I didn't want to go back up to the attic, but Michael was curious now, and there was no stopping him. We went upstairs. The diary was exactly where I'd left it the night before, on the floor, open to that last frantic entry. Michael picked it up, flipping through the pages. "This is creepy," he muttered. "But come on, it's just a book. There's no such thing as curses." He tossed the diary onto the desk and turned to leave. That's when it happened. The door to the attic slammed shut, hard enough to shake the walls. Michael and I stood there, frozen in place. "Did you?" I started, but Michael shook his head, wide-eyed. We both ran to the door, trying to yank it open, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew colder, the temperature dropping so fast we could see our breath. And then the footsteps started, slow, deliberate, coming from the corner of the attic. I turned, and there it was, again, the figure. This time it wasn't just standing still. It was moving, slowly, towards us. Michael, being the brave idiot he is, grabbed a broomstick from the corner and swung at the shadow. But it passed right through. No resistance, no sound, nothing. I don't know what happened next. It's a blur. The door suddenly gave way, and we both tumbled down the stairs, running as fast as we could. We didn't stop until we were back in the car, doors locked, engine running. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. That night, Michael admitted something I'll never forget. "David, when I touched that diary, I felt something dark, like it was pulling me in." He shivered. "I thought it was just my imagination, but now I don't know." We both knew what we had to do. The diary couldn't stay in that apartment. It couldn't stay anywhere. Whatever was tied to it wasn't finished with us. Now here's where things get even weirder. For those of you still watching, I've got a question. If you were in my shoes, would you have gone back for the diary? Or would you have left it there? Let me know in the comments. I need to know if anyone else would have been as reckless as I was. The next morning, we went back to the apartment with a plan. We were going to take the diary and burn it. Simple, right? Destroy whatever was connecting this thing to the figure, and hopefully end it once and for all. But deep down, I had this sinking feeling it wouldn't be that easy. We arrived just after sunrise, hoping that whatever had appeared in the attic last night wasn't as strong in the daylight. The apartment was eerily silent when we entered, like the building itself was holding its breath. We headed straight up to the attic. The diary was still there, sitting on the desk where Michael had tossed it. I picked it up carefully, the leather cover cold to the touch. "Let's just get this over with," I muttered, more to myself than to Michael. We took the diary outside, into the small patch of dirt behind the apartment. Michael poured gasoline on it, and I lit a match. For a moment, the flames flickered hesitantly, as if the diary was fighting back. But then they roared to life, consuming the book in seconds. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. We watched the flames until nothing was left but ash. It was over, or at least, that's what I thought. We went back to Michael's place, convinced we'd finally rid ourselves of whatever had been haunting me. But that night, something happened that shook me to my core. I woke up around 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, the room unnaturally cold. I glanced around, my heart pounding, and there, at the foot of my bed, was the figure. The same faceless shadow from the attic, standing completely still, watching me. I froze, unable to move, unable to speak. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how it was possible. We had burned the diary. It was gone. How could this thing still be here? And then it did something it had never done before. It spoke, a low, raspy voice that sent chills down my spine. "The curse is not bound by the diary," it said. "It is bound to you." I tried to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. "You opened the door, David," it whispered, "and now it can never be closed." Just as I thought it was going to reach out and touch me, the figure vanished. I sat up, gasping for air, my heart racing. Was it a dream? No, I knew it wasn't. The cold air, the voice, it was real. And I finally understood. Burning the diary hadn't broken the curse. If anything, it had made things worse. The next day, I tried to act normal, pretending that nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. The figure was tied to me now. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I didn't tell Michael what happened. He didn't need to know. He'd already risked enough by helping me. But I could tell he sensed something was wrong. Over the next few days, I barely slept, jumping at every little sound, every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I was losing it, spiraling into paranoia. Then one night, I heard the footsteps again, slow, deliberate, like they were coming from just outside my bedroom door. I lay there, frozen, listening, and then the door creaked open. The figure stood in the doorway, its dark silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. This time, I didn't run. There was no point. I knew it was never going to leave me. And in that moment, I accepted it. The curse wasn't something I could escape. It was a part of me now. The figure stepped closer, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I looked directly at it, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. But instead of reaching for me, the figure simply disappeared, faded into the darkness, as if it had never been there. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that the figure never came back, but I'd be lying. It's still there, always watching, always waiting. Sometimes it disappears for weeks, even months, but it always returns, and each time it gets a little closer. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why not just move? Why not leave the country, get as far away as possible? But it wouldn't matter. The curse isn't tied to a place. It's tied to me. And no matter where I go, it'll follow. So, I guess this is my life now. Living with the knowledge that one day, the figure will finally get close enough to touch me. And when that happens, well, I don't think I'll be around to tell the rest of the story. But hey, if you're ever in a strange old building and you find something that doesn't feel right, a diary, a book, an object that gives you chills, my advice? Leave it alone. Some secrets are best left buried. And before I go, let me ask you this. Have you ever come across something that gave you a bad feeling? Like you knew deep down it was dangerous, but you couldn't explain why? If so, drop a comment and share your story. Who knows, maybe we're all cursed in some way. If you're still here, I know you're hooked. Stories like this only get better, and trust me, I've got plenty more chilling tales coming your way. So if you're into the eerie, the mysterious, and the downright spine-tingling, make sure to hit that like button to show some love. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on the next story. Share this video with your friends if you think they're brave enough to handle it. And drop a comment below. Let's see if you can top this story with one of your own, if you dare.